Back in the 1990s, there was a lot of talk about the depletion of the ozone layer, global warming, and the fact that we as humans are emitting toxins into the atmosphere that are going to cause planetary damage to the point that it would be reversible, irreversible actually. Well, we're at that tipping point right now, or at least close to it. I'm Ted Asregadoo, this is Truthout Interviews, and on the program today is economic historian Richard Smith, who's written a lengthy but very powerful piece on Truthout, which is entitled Capitalism and the Destruction of Life on Earth. 6 theses on saving the humans. Hello, Richard. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Hi, Ted. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, first off, you really don't mince words on this article. You look right at the main driver of the possible end of our way of life right here, and you lay it at the feet of global capitalism. But, the way I read your article, it's really not totally, but there's a real underlying sense that it's the will of the shareholders that are driving this, really driving us off the precipice here. The will of the shareholders really affects what the multinational corporation will do. And the multinational corporation task is to roll out products and make a profit and return that share or increase the profit so the shareholders get a nice dividend check on their investment, and they come back and they say, oh, we're happy. What can you grow for us next year? How much more can you grow this portfolio next year? So you have this sort of cycle, and you highlight it, and you say that it's something that we're really locked into. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Am I wrong about this in terms of that it seems to be that the shareholders are really kind of sort of pushing that machine towards its inevitable end, if you will?
Yeah, Ted, I think you've got exactly the main point there. But when you say shareholders, we too are some of the shareholders. Not very many. I mean, we don't have very much, like the capitalists or something. But what the point is that what I'm trying to say there is that we are indeed very much locked into a dynamic, all of us. Jared Diamond some years back wrote a book called Collapse, and he talked about the Easter Island chiefs and other chiefs of the Mayans, and he talked about how these chiefs in Easter Island were locked into competition with one another. And what happened? The consequence was of that. They had to build these great statues, and they were engaged in war with one another. And to do all this, they had to cut down the trees one by one, cut down the trees for these big cranes, and to erect these great moai, they called them, these great statues. And so they were locked in this competition with one another to succeed. And if they didn't succeed, they would be overthrown. And so there was this competition that led them to overwhelm and overdrive their environmental endowment. And that led to the collapse of the civilization, because when they cut down all the big trees, they didn't have any more fishing canoes, and so they couldn't go out and fish, and that's how they lived. Okay, so what Diamond was talking about was how in societies, people become locked into the ruling classes of these societies. And he was no Marxist, but he actually made a kind of Marxist argument there, that the ruling classes of society are locked into a competitive dynamic. And what I tried to say in other articles in this also is that the corporations are locked into a dynamic. We're all workers, consumers, producers, and corporate shareholders are all locked into a dynamic of competition with one another to consume the planet to as fast as we possibly can, to turn everything into product and to consume it and so forth. Because if we stop consuming, stop this overconsumption, we're all out of work. So that's the problem. That's the drive. Now, it didn't matter, as I said in the article, it didn't so much matter, this dynamic, in Adam Smith's time, when corporations were small, businesses were small. They didn't have much impact on the whole planet. But today, when you have huge corporations that can devour whole forests and scrape the ocean bottoms and mine all the minerals and oil in such incredible speed, and just transform it all into something to be consumed and then reproduce it again all the next day, you have a big problem, because we have finite resources.
You mentioned, you sort of reference Adam Smith, and when he was writing about the invisible hand, he was talking more about small-scale capitalism, not the global capitalism that we're in. And it's important to make this distinction within what a lot of current capitalists or global capitalists often cite as, Adam Smith is their touchstone to their ideology, their economic ideology. But if he could, it would be interesting to see what he would say about the kind of system that we're locked into. He couldn't have envisioned it back then. If he could, he may have written about it. And I haven't read enough Adam Smith to know if he even touched on global capitalism to the extent that, what we have today. I don't think that he had that kind of foresight. But nevertheless, if he were able to comment on where we are today, what do you think he would say?
The logic of imminent development of capitalism, of the constant revolutionization of productive forces, was kind of built into the model that Adam Smith developed. And I think he really did see economies of scale and economies of growth by specialization leading to more and more production. It was productivity that he was theorizing, in large part, about how specialization would lead to cheaper production. But then cheaper production, of course, led to a bigger market and therefore a self-reinforcing pattern of growth. So I think actually the pattern of growth, which eventually was globalization, which was so Smith didn't really explain it anywhere near as well. He didn't really venture on down that path. But of course, Marx, barely like half a century later, 75 years later, in the 1848, in the Manifesto, laid out the imminent tendencies in capitalism very well in terms of creating a world market and reproducing itself constantly on an ever greater scale, and that's what's come to be. So I think that was built into Smith's model. I don't know what he would say about it today, but people say, well, Smith has this model that you have this invisible hand, and that everyone should just look out for number one, and the idea was that, well, the common good would get taken care of by itself. Smith was explicit that we as a society should not look out directly for the common good. We should not try to enforce the common good. We should just look to ourselves and be selfish accumulators and selfish individualists in the economy. And that through that activity, the common good would willy-nilly take care of itself. Well, it was a dumb theory. It didn't work. And it hasn't worked, certainly hasn't worked today, because the common good is a wreck over the whole planet. And so we're faced with this huge problem today, which is how do we ensure the common good over the whole society and the whole planet, because it's been not looked after for 300 years of capitalism, and that's the problem.
One of the things that you touched on in your article is about the way in which President Obama is trying to control carbon emissions that would lead to a decrease in the amount of global or climate change that is happening on our planet. So he's tried to raise CAFE standards. Those are the fuel standards in automobiles. But you highlight that there are a number of loopholes within this effort that even if, and you even said, even if we were to implement across the board on all our trucks, SUVs, vehicles, large trucks, small cars, a higher fuel efficiency standard, it still wouldn't do much to curb climate change or global warming. And why is that?
If you can decrease the rate of production of pollutants per vehicle, but if you're just producing millions of more vehicles every year, the planet doesn't care where they come from. It just cares that they happen. And the U.S. auto production is now up about where it was in 2007 before the crisis. But the U.S. is saturated with cars. But China is not saturated with cars. China is expecting to have 1 billion cars on the planet by 2050 or thereabouts. They have over 100 million now. This is just insane. And that's just China. Then there's Africa and Europe and so forth. So even if your cars produce, even if you have CAFE standards and you reduce the amount of pollution per vehicle, that's fine. But if you're then free to produce as many vehicles as you want, that is, if auto producers are as free to produce as many as they want, and if consumers are as free and need to buy cars to get around, then you can't solve the problem.
We are living in a hyper-consumer society. And you bring up the iPhone throughout your article, and also the store IKEA. And to me, when I was reading this, they kind of stand as twin icons of a hyper-consumer society, because with the iPhone, they tend to roll out new phones every couple of years. So this year we have two new iPhones. We have the iPhone C and the iPhone 5S. And Apple makes it so you have to have this phone that your 4 or your 4S that you had is, it's obsolete at this point. And then you also have IKEA on the other end, which creates very inexpensive furniture that's designed not to last. It's going to fall apart in a couple of years. So what happens? You go back to IKEA and you buy some more. Well, I guess that's all well and good at some level, but then you highlight the fact that, well, if you think about it, the amount of wood that it takes to manufacture some of these desks, some of these, some of these furnishings, you're leveling whole forests just so you can buy cheap furniture that you have to replace every couple of years. Just like Apple wants you to discard your old iPhone after 2 years and get the new amazing product. So this kind of hyper-consumerism, you're saying, is even pushing us faster towards the edge of the cliff.
You get the impression from many activists that the major problem of the planet is global warming and CO2 emissions and so forth. And that certainly is the leading edge of the problem, but it's overconsumption of everything on the planet. Forests, fish, waters, mineral oil, just everything we're consuming to death. And again, the model, the idea that corporations should produce something and then replace it with another model and successively develop like that. Again, that didn't so much matter 100 years ago or 50 years ago. But today, the scale of everything, of production, it matters a lot. It's really just completely unsustainable. So what you would have to do, what I'm saying, what I suggest throughout, is that to have a rational and environmentally rational model of consumption, you would have to build products to last as long as possible, to be rebuildable and upgradable, everything from cars to, furniture or whatnot, and phones. And there's no reason on earth why you need to replace. I'm still operating with an iPhone 3GS. It still works, but it won't work for long because they designed the software so that it will be able to be updated, But we all know perfectly well that this doesn't have to be. That phone could be made to last for decades. It's just they want to force you to buy another one. Well, it wouldn't matter so much if there were just, 500 million of us on the planet and maybe that many iPhones. But today, with 7 going on 9 or 10 billion people, we just don't have the resources for that. So this has all got to come to a screaming halt. And we have to completely restructure, reconceive, and reconstruct a world economy that doesn't have to be based on continuous daily reproduction of stuff that doesn't need to be reproduced. That's what we have to think about, how to create a completely different kind of economy. Of course, that can't be a capitalist economy, because how could a capitalist economy work like that? So you have to have a completely different post-capitalist kind of economy. And that's what I'm beginning to talk about toward the end of the article.
Yeah, you do highlight that towards the end. You talk about it is kind of a capitalism model woven into it, but it has elements of socialism, it has elements of environmentalism, but you're very upfront. You say people need jobs. They need to sustain themselves. They need to live at a level where they are comfortable, not just barely surviving. And these are the imperatives for a different model, a new economic model that's going to fold in some of these things that already exist. That you can't eliminate the acquisitive desire of people. I don't think that that's even possible. You or wanting a better life for yourself. You can't eliminate those sort of things. But you also can't have a society that we have now that is going to extinguish all those resources. So there's nothing left for anyone, that we're going to kill ourselves off as a species. Like you said, we're trying to save the humans. I remember back in the 70s, they used to have bumper stickers that said "Save the whales." Now they should have bumper stickers that say "Save the humans," which is essentially what the environmentalist movement is trying to do. A lot of people come out and they say, "Oh, you're trying to, save this rare form of salmon or some frog." I said, "It's not really about that. It comes down at some point the kind of selfish self-preservation, saying, I'm trying to save it for not only me, but my kids, my grandkids, and humanity in general."
I am by no means arguing for austerity. I'm just arguing that I'm saying that we need to reconceive our lives so that our lives are not fulfilled through consumerism, which is not at all to say that I'm not saying we should be Maoists and wear blue suits and eat in commune halls or something like that. On the contrary, I'm saying we should have beautiful houses and fashionable clothes if you want, but just not clothes designed to be thrown away. My dad had 3 suits his whole life. They were perfectly okay. My mom had, I don't know how many dresses, but not very many, hardly anything, really. I mean, compared to what we have today. And they weren't living in caves. They were doing okay, So I'm just saying that we need to have a different conception of what a quality of life is like, not living standard based on accumulation of goods, bigger houses, more cars, and that kind of thing, but on what makes life pleasurable. We're coming to a turning point in humanity's existence in which we really have to rethink the whole thing. And it can't be capitalism. It's just got to be some kind of I don't care what you want to call it, socialism or eco-socialism or economic democracy, call it what you want, but we have to come up with a different non-capitalist society that will provide us with a wealth of a material existence that's satisfactory for people, but also a wealth of human possibilities for people to develop themselves and live full lives. And I think we can do that, but we have to get beyond capitalism.
Well, I think you brought up one thing that struck me, and it's something that we live in now, that we turn over, or at least we buy new things much more frequently than we used to. You talked about your parents, your dad having 3 suits, your mother only having a handful of dresses, and they lasted a long time. The clothes that we buy off the rack, they don't last very long because they're made very cheaply. The other thing I was thinking about was durable goods. My wife and I, when we bought our place that we live in, we bought a new refrigerator because the one that when we bought the place, it had an old one and it really was breaking down. It actually failed. So we bought a new refrigerator. Well, flash forward 12 years later, our so-called new refrigerator sort of died. We called a repair person to come out. He opened it up. He looked in there. He goes, "You know what? You're going to have to pay me more to fix this thing than it would for you to go down to Sears and buy a new one. It's just cheaper for you to go buy a new one." And I said, "What? That's just crazy." I said, "My parents had their refrigerator for like 25 years. They never changed it. Same with their stove. It never changed." Well, they said, "Well, that's welcome to the new world. They don't make them to last anymore. They replaced everything with plastic to fail, to wear out. And they don't make the replacement parts that are going to last." And I know that this is the world we live in, but it just shocked me with that phrase, durable goods, something that's going to last a long time. They're not durable anymore. They're just goods,
That's right. Yeah, it's a past practice. My mom has a 1939 Sunbeam toaster. Works perfectly. We've gone through maybe 4 toaster ovens in the last 10 years. I mean, they just die. The coils break, they fall apart, and you have to throw it away because you can't. There's no repair shops. Well, we have to bring back repair shops. We have to build things to be repaired and last. I mean, my mom's toaster is far more beautiful and functional than this thing that we have. But I can't buy one like hers because they're all plastic junk out there. That's all there is. That's all that's available. So you need to reconceive production so that people can have durable goods that will really be durable and can be shared.
I was listening to National Public Radio this morning, and they ran a story about typewriters and how they're making a bit of a comeback, that there are certain industries like law firms that still need typewriters because they're a much more efficient way to process paperwork. And so they talked to a guy who owns this company that refurbishes old typewriters. And he says they work just fine. He says the only problem is that certain things you can't get anymore, and they're getting harder and harder to find on the used market. Things like typewriter ribbons and things like that. But he was just saying that there are industries. He says we make an okay living servicing these industries, or at least these businesses that demand typewriters, not computers. They want physical typewriters, that they can actually do and so they're in the repair business. That's their job. They refurbish typewriters and they repair them. And maybe it's a sign of the times. Who knows?
But we'd have to generalize that for a whole society, really. That's the thing. And businesses these days, they can't do that because they have to compete. And if somebody can produce something that's a little bit shoddier but cheaper, wages are falling, so they'll sell it. That's the logic.
You remember the old Maytag commercial where the guy would just wait around waiting for a call to repair it, and he would never go out and repair any of the Maytags because they were built so well that they never needed to be repaired?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, right. That's good. Well, I had this, in the article, I had this. It was unfortunate I couldn't get a very good copy of it to photocopy, but the Volkswagen Beetle ads, yeah, that car was designed to be rebuildable forever. And it was, in fact, every Volkswagen dealer had every part for it. They did upgrade it and change it a bit through the years, but not terribly much. And you could do it yourself. I mean, I had a 62 Volkswagen. I rebuilt the motor myself. It was not a terribly big challenge. And, you need something like that. Not that particular car, I'm saying, but there's no reason why you couldn't have vehicles and durable appliances and the kinds of things that are now conventionally sold over and over and over again every year, new models. There's no reason that couldn't be just built to be durable and long-lasting forever, I mean, for a reasonable length of time anyway.
Certainly. Things are always going to fall apart, but if you can get, for a car, at least with cars now, they seem to last longer. That's one thing I can say, is that when GM and Detroit was producing cars, it seemed like you had to buy a new car every 5 years. And then Japan came on the market, and suddenly cars are lasting 10, 12, 15 years, and people aren't changing them out. They're just saying, this is great. I just turn it on and it goes, And I think that's what most people want. They just want something that's gonna work for them. It's nice to have something new and shiny, but it loses its luster pretty quick.
The trend these days with automobiles is to make them ever more computerized, which means that all that stuff they put on there is more expensive to replace. So it'll get to the stage where it's like your fridge that, the car runs perfectly, except that this doesn't work and that doesn't work, and the cost of repairing all that is cost more than it'll cost you to buy a new car. You may as well just go buy a new car. So you'll take this perfectly good car and drive it off to the junkyard.
Right. Well, Richard, I want to thank you for being on the program, and I want to encourage everyone to read your article because it's thought-provoking. It gets you to think. At least it got me to think in a different way, not only about the things I use every day, like my phone, my cell phone that is, or even some of the furnishings that I buy, but rather that the system that we are locked into.
Well, thanks very much. I really do appreciate the opportunity to meet on your show.
Richard Smith is an economic historian. That's Truthout Interviews for another week. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.